Good morning. So today I am coming clean with you about my worm bin failures. I have been raising compost worms for at least 5 years now, and I still have some of the original compost worms that I bought way back when, but I've been through several generations of these and had a lot of challenges along the way. Every year I have gotten worm castings from this process, but every year at some point there has been a challenge that I've had to overcome with this process, and I've learned a lot over the years, and so I'm going to share some of what I've learned through all of these trial and error. Anyway, so when I first got my compost worms, I wanted to save a little bit of money, and so I built myself a compost worm bin set with three different three buckets that were each a little bit different. Actually, the top two are the same and the bottom is a little different. And what you do is you cut holes in the bottom of the top two of these buckets. You cut holes around the edges where they sit slightly above the bucket below. And the bottom bucket is kept whole and intact, and that ends up as a collection point for the leachate, the liquid that comes off of your worm castings as the worms are processing them. Basically worm pee. So this this system worked okay. It worked okay outdoors in the shade. There were a couple of important things, though, that were a challenge with it and that could have been improved on my system. First off, the liquid that collects in the bottom bucket, that is a leachate. That many people call that worm tea, and that is incorrect. That is not worm tea. That is worm bin leachate. It's the liquid that comes off as the worms are processing the food. There may be some value to it as a supplement for your plants in your garden, but you need to be collecting it and distributing it almost as fast as it collects. So you can't let it sit there because it becomes rancid very quickly. So that is that's the first problem with this 3-tier bucket system, is that leachate inevitably will sit for too long and become rank. So what you really need to be doing with that is you need to put a hole in the bottom of that bucket. You need to drain it, ideally right into your garden. So if you can locate something like this in an area that is shaded, because it can't be too hot in the sun for the worms, but also it has a tube that goes right out to a garden spot, you maybe move the tube around, that might work. Otherwise, you could just have it drip into the soil right below the bucket, and that, no harm done. Maybe put a spigot in the bottom bucket so that you can control the flow. And if you move it, you don't have it dripping as you're trying to move the bucket. That would solve that problem. What I did with these buckets, though, is I tried to adapt them for indoor use. A lot of people talk about how great it is to have a worm bin in your kitchen, so you just throw your kitchen scraps in and the worms consume those kitchen scraps and turn it into wonderful worm castings. It might be nice to have it in your kitchen if it weren't for fungus gnats. Fungus gnats became the bane of my existence when I was trying to raise worms inside of my house. They're tiny, tiny little gnats, and there are literally thousands of them after a while, assuming that they establish themselves in your worm compost, and there's a very, very good chance that they will. Once they get going, there's literally, every time you open the top of this bucket, there's a cloud of fungus gnats that comes out. how do you solve this problem? That would take some engineering skill to design a closed system where you could get food in there, food scraps in there, without letting the fungus gnats in or out, ideally. And then where you were also collecting and disposing of probably that liquid during the wintertime, because there's just not much you could do with it unless you want to freeze it in droplets, you know, and store it in your freezer. Save it for the next spring. So creating a system like that, I am sure is doable, but I haven't seen one, and I certainly haven't built one for myself. And so the indoor version, I eventually moved to the basement, and we had fungus gnats in the basement. Once I took this the next spring and took it back outside, the worm bin back outside, the fungus gnats died. But if you are like me and you also start your seeds in the basement, then having a whole lot of fungus gnats flying around, it's not an ideal situation. It's not gonna totally ruin anything, but it's very annoying. So that was, for me, that was almost the end of the plastic bucket process. I decided at that point that I wanted to build a worm tower out of wood. But it's difficult with wood because making nesting pieces of, nesting buckets out of wood is very hard. So instead what I did was I just built a tower, and I would put food scraps in at the top. My idea was I was going to take the worm composted mud out from the bottom, because that's what it turned into. It was supposed to be worm castings, but by the time it got down to the bottom, it had compressed, and I had a whole stack full of this. What I had at the bottom was a very thick mud, and that mud became home to something that I now realize is a blessing and a curse, and that was black soldier flies. So black soldier flies came and laid their eggs in this mud at the bottom, which was much damper than the worms could actually handle. So they could only handle the stuff at the top. And I was putting in paper, shredded paper the whole time, just things to kind of try and dry it out. But I never managed to keep it dry enough because that worm leachate just kept going down, down, down and getting trapped at the bottom of this tower. And so the deeper you went, the damper it got. And so this was perfect for the black soldier fly larvae, honestly. So that actually worked out okay because they took care of the stuff at the bottom. And what I ended up with was some pretty potent fertilizer for my garden, but not really what I wanted. I wanted worm castings, and what I got was a solid brick of very potent mud that I could break up and distribute around the garden. It was probably more acid than it would have been otherwise because it had been damper for that whole time, probably was fermenting more than being broken down by the worms that were further up in the worm bin. So the next season, I took this whole contraption and turned it on its side. I cut a door in the side, and then I had a long wooden box, but it was kind of octagonal, almost, it's almost like a big long tube with a doorway in it. And that is what I've been using ever since. And that has worked out a whole lot better. However, this past year, what happened was squirrels discovered it. And the squirrels started gnawing through the wood, and did manage to gnaw through the wood, got into the insides, and were extracting the vegetables as quickly as I could put them into this worm bin. So anyway, I am still working on perfecting my system, but I now know what the right system looks like. So the best worm bin that I have seen was just an 8-foot by 4-foot box. Now I would probably build mine more like 6-foot by 2-foot because I'd want to be able to operate just from one side. But it was a wooden box with a wooden cover, and it was about a foot deep So you don't really want to be piling too much stuff on top of your worms. You want to keep it, 6 inches to 8 inches of material that the worms can work on. And this it just worked really well as a means of growing worms and letting the liquid just seep out of the seams at the bottom. So if you want to locate that someplace in your yard where you would like to have a little bit of extra nutrient dropping right under the soil for a year or two, and then move it to a different place, this is probably a really good way to go. Just like a 6 foot by 2 foot box with a hinged lid made out of wood. The toughest wood you can find. Ideally, you would be able to salvage, hopefully, some hardwood. If not, you can make it out of softwood. Just understand that you might have squirrels that are trying to get in and you might have to figure out a way to deal with that. But anyway, that's the best method that I've seen for housing compost worms. All the fancy towers and stuff, I probably wouldn't bother with, because I've tried a number of different systems and found that a big flat wooden box really works great. So that is my suggestion to you. I hope that you enjoy this video. I hope I taught you something, and I hope there's something that I can learn from you. And if so, please drop it in the comments below. Would love to see a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this channel, and please take a look at foodforestgardenclub.org. We're doing some fun things there, getting together every couple of weeks, starting to swap things that we have in excess and surplus and send them to each other, or when we happen to live close by, just driving them by and dropping them off. So that's a lot of fun too. But in the meantime, I hope you are doing some great planning for your gardens. I hope you're looking forward to a nice green summer, and in the meantime, have a great day.